Hello and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. Hope you'll enjoy listening. This one's from True Parley Grandmaster Foot about life in the Torment Nexus. An absolutely excellent title for an excellent parlay. This is in a pair of parlay from Mr. Foot about the concept of art inspiring change. So in the first one, which I'll link in the description, but you don't have to listen to it for this parlay, just what it was about was positive change through art. So the band Muse makes a soundtrack or an album that is about pushing for change and creating a good world to live in and our societal unrest. And this causes, arguably no positive change. But when there's art about a negative change, unfortunately, it kind of seems like those do work to influence people, and so that's what this is about. It isn't quite accurate, Mr. Foot begins, to say that art hasn't inspired people to change the world. It's just a little different than what we expected. Quoting from Wikipedia, the Torment Nexus is a term used in critical commentary of the influence of science fiction on technological development. The term was coined in a 2021 tweet by The Onion staff writer Alex Bleckman. Dias Johnston of Inverse has defined the Torment Nexus as shorthand for something that backfired in fiction being unironically replicated in reality. Or to quote the original tweet, sci-fi author, in my book I invented the Torment Nexus as a cautionary tale. Tech company, at long last we have created the Torment Nexus from classic sci-fi novel Don't Create the Torment Nexus. So this is what it is, if you're not familiar with the concept. And Mr. Foot is using this as a idea to point at a broader trend that negative ideas presented in fiction often do influence the world a lot, which is why? But positive ones, no, people pass on those, I guess. I don't know. It just doesn't seem as good to them. I'm going to offer some explanations for maybe why this is happening in this parlay. But that's what it is. It's a stand-in for the Torment Nexus. You could imagine is a fantasy sci-fi MacGuffin that makes things bad, of course. It torments, who knows? Or, more shortly, our current world could be referred to as the Torment Nexus. Absolutely huge line, by the way. Please write a short story about this. I'll collect it next Friday. I'm sure it's going to be a banger. But it also gestures at the concept of a technology that is written in fiction because it's maybe understandable as a technological development, but bad. It backfires and ends up having a very large, usually human cost. We'll talk about that more later. And yet in reality, this is read, consumed. I'm not sure the idea is understood, but it's consumed, it's input into real humanity, and then a lot of people unironically replicate it in real life as if it wasn't the Torment Nexus from the cautionary tale, Don't Create the Torment Nexus. They just create it as if it's just an unproblematic good thing. That's very bizarre. You also might not completely believe me that this happens significantly often. Mr. Foot now has 3 or 4 more paragraphs of a frankly alarming number of examples of this subject, a lot of which I knew of but just didn't quite group together. The surveillance company, Palantir Technologies, has been named after the crystal ball from The Lord of the Rings. The metaverse, as pursued by the company formerly known as Facebook, was originally coined from the satirical and dystopian science fiction novel Snow Crash. The meal replacement brand Soylent is named after the product of the same name in a dystopian science fiction novel better known for its film adaptation Soylent Green. The Chinese camera surveillance system is called Skynet. We can go on. We could mention interrogation tactics, taking inspiration from 1984. How about the TV show Big Brother? Beast Games is a real TV show openly imitating the satirical dystopian Squid Game. Dead Talks AI is a startup that creates an AI chatbot based on your chat history with your dead relatives. Pretty sure there was a Black Mirror episode about that. One of the news stories of the last months was Anthropic's relationship with the US Department of War. Anthropic said that the military could use their AI for literally anything except mass surveillance and automated killing. The military did not enjoy that absurd limitation, and they had a falling out that you can learn about elsewhere. Surely the removal of the killing restriction on AI has never led to anything bad in sci-fi, citation needed. I get a little off topic. I don't know that you did. That is a frankly alarming number of examples. My point is that all of these will ruin the world and AI will take over. Not that all of these will ruin the world. And AI will take. That's not Mr. Food's point. Just to be clear, just in case it wasn't clear, Mr. Food is not saying that all of these will ruin the world and AI will take over. We're not saying that. We got that? Okay, good. All I'm trying to do is show that people are massively influenced by art in the form of the Torment Nexus, while they don't seem to be influenced to recreate the utopias seen in other media. Yeah, like whether you've watched the previous parlay or not, there are some depictions of good things in sci-fi, and people don't seem to be doing much to replicate those, though I will get back to that point, because they're not doing nothing to replicate those. A term I use to describe current events is cosmically funny, Mr. Food says. Current events are not funny. They tend to be horrific. But viewed from a cosmic lens, separated from having to live this reality, they are absurd and funny. So viewed from this cosmic perspective, away from all specifics, why are people only inspired by art when it makes their life worse? Again, a huge line. Yes, of course. Probably it goes without saying, but I wouldn't be laughing about this if it was about how it is in real life. I just can't locally do a whole lot about that right now. And so in the comfort of this parlay, we are going to talk about the, I think we can all agree, cosmically very funny trend that humanity keeps trying to develop the Torment Nexus from classic sci-fi novel Don't Create the Torment Nexus. That is, on some cosmic level, very funny. Why? It's bad. What are you doing? It wouldn't even be that hard to just make things better. Anyway, we'll get into it. So here's what I'm going to do in this parlay. I thought about it a little bit. I think I have a decent number of actual explanations. I mean, I don't know why this is happening, obviously. I'm sure it's a little bit of some of the things I'll mention, probably not some of the things I'll mention, and then a little bit of some other stuff. You know, who knows? But I don't find myself at a loss for why this is happening. I actually think there's some decent reasons, decent explanations, okay? It's not good to do. Though maybe one of these, it's like, maybe it's not that terrible of a thing to do. But it mostly is. And then I'm going to do something very exciting, which is to try to present solutions. That'll be interesting to unpack later. And so I'm not even going to tell you more about that part. Let's just go. Explanations. Why? Why do people do this? Again, if you're interested, we do have the previous parlay, which is people being influenced by positive media, but then it not going anywhere. And as with this, yes, you use the band Muse as a sort of example point, but it's my thing in parlay to get it to the general category pretty quickly. One specific example just doesn't really matter for these topics. We're just trying to give people a framework to think about it. And indeed, music, we focus a lot on that in that parlay, is a kind of tricky one to influence people. So let's start there, actually. An explanation. Because it's legitimately easier. It's easier to describe making something negative than it is to describe making something positive most of the time. There's a whole bunch of reasons for this that we could spend a whole parlay just on its own talking about. There are things like the ephemeral and human nature of positive experiences, that they are often fleeting, contextual, subjective, not very engineerable moments. You can only really create something with like a flash in the pan appeal by being given instructions. Most of the time, for a human to really experience the heights of their positive emotions, they need some specific context that is not very replicable, in my opinion. It's not very easy to mass produce that. Actually, in your own series of Parlay, Mr. Food, we've spent no small amount of time talking about how games that push to a new boundary or do something new with the medium in video games will have a big impact on people sometimes, but it often doesn't work for a lot of people, and very few games manage to do this. Perhaps with this mindset, we could say, or is it amazing that there are any games at all that semi-reliably have a meaningful impact on people's emotions in a way other than negative, like in a positive way? You cry maybe, but in a way that is cathartic for the human experience rather than like you're just suffering, you know what I mean? And it might be that you become really happy when you play one of these games. That we have any art at all that semi-reliably does that is actually kind of awesome, because that's hard to do, is my point. Negative things Oh, you can easily explain something that would just be negative, because negative experiences in the much more cultured, refined negative experience is often formulaic. You know, humans don't like a lot of things that you can manufacture. And so if you just mass produce something, a lack of individualism, you've already got something humans inherently kind of don't like, you know? Create a world where there's no change from our own, but that all toothbrushes look exactly the same, and some human enjoyed quality has been lost. Even though I think we can agree that's not that bad, but just like why? It seems inherently more negative. You see what I mean? It's very easy to describe the details of how you would make something bad, whereas something good is harder to describe, more ephemeral. A lot of the problems of creating a utopia would be finding ways to get people to actually be happy now that we're in a situation where it would be, in theory, reasonable to be happy. But that's not the same as people just being happy. Creating the circumstances that would make people able to be happy with a given mindset that could lead to happiness would be easy compared to, not easy, but easy compared to the task of getting people actually to the point that they are happy. Even if you fixed absolutely every problem you could ever think of in the entire world right now, it would take most of current humanity at least their entire lifetime that they have left. Hopefully that includes creating some life extensions, so maybe they'll still have some time to be happy, to get to the point where they've unpacked all the toxic baggage from our current society and might like actually be in touch with themselves and be happy. Even if you fixed everything right now, most of current humanity has a ghost of a chance of getting to that point. Unfortunately, I don't know. I hope that you, dear listener, will join me on this possibly futile journey to be happy in this forsaken society. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's hard to create those things. It just is harder to create reliable happiness because a lot of what it makes people happy just doesn't have to do with reliability that much. Whereas it's just easier to make negative things. Doing things well is hard. Whoa, this parlay is getting crazy already. But that would be my first thing, is that it is literally just easier to describe negative things. Another way to look at it is that if something is from like a novel, partly meant for entertainment or to hold the reader's attention, if you don't want to call it entertainment specifically, well, the inciting incident of the novel will probably be something negative so that the novel has stakes. And there is an idea in writing that the more specifics you provide about something, the more interactable it is in the narrative because we know details of how it works. Even if there's something like 1984 where it's described to you the many ways that people are surveilled, but not all of the ways that people are being surveilled, that still does the work of giving you the idea that there would be this extent of ways that people are being surveilled. And therefore, when the book does a bit of a twist on you and someone is being watched in a way they didn't expect, like you didn't expect it necessarily, you may fall for the twist, but you won't think that's unfair in the same way because the system of the novel was somewhat explained. This is a concept in maintaining a sort of magic circle in fiction entertainment. And so that means that inherently, to create that magic circle with that method anyway, you're going to somewhat describe how the negative thing is constructed in a way that often with a positive thing, there isn't much to explain. Like, why did those cookies taste better on that one picnic that one afternoon? Most of the reasons that a human would think the cookies taste better don't have to do with any ingredient in the cookies. It would just be something circumstantial, or the breeze on the wind, or the tea they had with the cookie, or whatever. It's, possible, but not as likely it would be a recipe. And even then, the instructions for the recipe are going to be a bit more bespoke from person to person. Make this in a factory you may not easily be able to do. Whereas these negative things, I've made my point. So this first one, and I think it is a big point, the way we talk about negative things and the way that negative experiences for humans are is inherently more replicable, unfortunately. Now, this is kind of a weak one in the sense that it doesn't explain why people would make those things, though. It's a strong point, in my humble opinion, in the sense that it explains like that it would be easier to make those things in a way that perhaps to some of you had not occurred to you before. It occurred to me while writing the notes for this. It is kind of just easier to provide instructions for negative things. It's just easy for things to be bad, but it doesn't explain why people would still make those things. Now, some of you might be joining me in feeling like there's actually just no need for an explanation for why people do things that way. It's because they're stupid. It's because people with a lot of money often inherited all that money, so they're not that smart, and so they just do whatever, and they have a bunch of cushion money to protect them from their mistakes, which they make a lot of. But they just have that much money, and it's really easy to like not have no money if you don't do something like directly self-destructive, although these people often do, with that big pile of money. So, okay, like we don't need to explain why people do that. But I don't totally accept this because behind every callous, incompetent business person, there are people making things work despite their idiotic decisions, you know? So I think we can assume that if they needed to convince any meaningful amount of people to make a thing that would directly ruin humanity, and like there's pop culture things describing specifically how that would cause this to go badly, I think it's fair to say humans are not this complacent. You know, when people tried to make a bomb during like the 1900s Cold War era, that would destroy the entire world, even the US military said that bomb is too big. When the US military says that your bomb is too big, you know you got a problem. You need to tone it down a notch now. When even the US military doesn't want to destroy the whole world, that's when you know you messed up. Like, whoosh, geez, that's actually impressive. Good for you. Maybe they should have that hesitance more often. Anyway, and so you see what I mean. You know, I don't think that it is completely unnecessary to talk about or engage with why so many people would agree to make something, at least named if not structured like these things. It's not quite enough of an explanation to just say, yeah, a lot of the time the people in charge are just that stupid. They are, but I don't think that that's enough of an explanation. Humans are not directly throwing themselves into the abyss, even if most people are way too much a follower. Sure. Fine, but there still needs to be a bit more. So let's begin with those. I have more of those. Let's talk about a kind of chicken and the egg situation. So the idea here is that it isn't as clear that the thing that they are building is the negative thing, but then they name it after the negative thing. So in this narrative, something like Palantir Technologies would be 95% of the way to being complete, and then toward the end, they would name it Palantir Technologies. And yes, at this point, light bulbs will go on for lots of people that work at this company. They may get very uncomfortable all of a sudden with what they've done, but it was sufficiently unrelated and then not labeled that way for it to come along like this. So basically, also, we assume that the people didn't know about like they hadn't really been thinking about the Palantir from Lord of the Rings while they were making this thing. But now they are, and maybe now they regret it, but it's already made. Like something like that is this narrative. Yawn, I know, but it is a reasonable possibility, wouldn't you agree? For each individual case, as we talked about before, like it doesn't really matter if like you could look up whether that's what happened for any of these. I'm sure it didn't for lots of them. I'm sure they did think of the thing first. But for some of them, you can imagine it seems kind of unbelievable to start a company literally called Skynet if that is the thing people think is bad. But then maybe they like saw it. I don't know. Their delusional leader saw it in a certain light, and then it was mostly built before it was named that way or something like this, you know, or that was the project name and people kind of laughed nervously about it, but then they made it the official name, you know, things like this. So yeah, I do think that there's plenty of room for that type of thing, where they basically just came up with a similar thing and then looked for names and then didn't have the social sense to not name it this, but they weren't like intentionally deciding that thing inspired by that sci-fi work when they made it. You see what I mean? I also think that for a lot of these, as kind of a related thing, so I'm going to treat it as the same point, there is the phenomenon that probably not you, Mr. Foot, but a lot of people underestimate how cheap ideas are. like most good ideas follow from their circumstances. So if you think in a systemic way and you check all of the like angles or whatever of a situation, you will recreate most good ideas because they're obvious. That's why they're good. They make sense given the circumstances. They apply, you might say, to the situation at hand, and that's why the idea is good. Therefore, it is somewhat obvious if you look at the situation a certain way. And I think we've all felt this before too, when someone who knows a lot about something we also know a lot about makes a point we had not considered. There's often a feeling like, I can't believe I didn't think of that myself, or like I sort of could have or would have given enough time, thought of it myself, that they had a good system to think of it and they happened to arrive at it sooner with their unique bespoke path through their interests in their life. They were able to think of it sooner, but it seems like it does kind of follow from the situation in that field, you know. It's a little bit weird that you can succeed in a market, you know, if you start a business, a shop, or even just something like a YouTube channel, you can succeed just by finding a niche. That's somewhat strange because you can just map out niches. Wouldn't they all be taken? But they're very frequently not. And I encourage you, if you need a very high level piece of direction for how to make a successful YouTube channel, it's that. There are unfilled niches. They will be easier to find than you would expect if you can fill one. It's gonna work, basically. I'm not sure you should make that YouTube channel, but it would succeed if you did. It's really that easy. Well, once you found the niche, it's really that easy. You're gonna have to go deep into a subject, but you know, you'll know. My advice for people who want to start like writing or making art is just consume enough of the media that you're interested in making to have an opinion about even the frontier works in that medium. Read the things that people who are enormous fans of fantasy, current, modern, new, testing the waters fantasy, read the books that they really like. And then when you have, you like those books, but you have some critiques of them as well, despite them being the forefront of that medium, you have an opinion about this thing, go do it. It's not the only way you can make art, but you will both make something that you and other people will be happy with and probably be somewhat successful. So I think that's a good approach. It's just my opinion. Take it or people don't like art opinions from me. So maybe you do, but it's an association I have. I think people think ideas are more expensive than they are, in other words. That people come up with good ideas because they just like do. They just magically do. It kind of feels like there's no method. I understand why people feel this way, but that's wrong and ideas are very cheap. You can just create a system to have a never-ending brainstorm. You will come up with ideas. It is mostly the execution of the idea that's good. If you think otherwise, if you look closely at the works that really surpass the just good stuff in the world, you will find that the idea is secondary to the way it's executed. And that many famous stories are actually not very idea-based. Like the Lord of the Rings has kind of a bad elevator pitch. Like hobbits go on a journey to throw a ring into a volcano. It's not really about that at all because ideas and premise are very cheap. You can make a good story with a compelling idea and premise, and many good stories do not have a compelling idea and premise. It doesn't matter. You could call those things marketing. The example I always like to give is this famous author was being accosted on a forum for like, I just can't write because I don't have good ideas. And he said, ideas are cheap. It doesn't matter. I could have made a successful book with any idea. It wasn't the idea. And the person said, oh yeah, prove it. No, you can't. Some ideas are just bad. And he said, okay, literally just give me any idea at all for a fantasy novel, and I will write it, and I will succeed and sell a lot of copies of it. And the thing they said, according to the story, is Roman Empire, Pokemon, and then they made that, and that is the Codex Alera series, which has 6 books. So I don't think that Roman Empire Pokemon is a bad idea, but that's irrelevant to whether you think it's good. And by the way, I'm not completely convinced those books are all that good, but they were certainly plenty successful. It is no factor at all that Roman Empire Pokemon is the idea. You see, I don't know. And like that, someone just would have thought of that. Like that's an obvious thing to think of, you know, obvious in a certain sense. You get it. That's this point. I do think that some of these things are in the media they're in because they feel like an obvious point on the tech tree, but they just come at some human cost. And so it's a lot of these stories are not about like, everything about this thing is bad. The story is about how this thing has severe consequences, but does address something in society, or come, at least even if it's mostly really terrible, comes from some understandable starting point that humans can relate to. At least is the idea in most of these stories. And I think that for many of these technologies, like it's just pretty obvious to create something vaguely like this, and then maybe they just found the name. So that's, I know that kind of a ho-hum explanation. That's where we are, man. There's actually not a good reason to create the Torment Nexus. Like, that's, strap in, because we got a few more bad reasons to create the Torment Nexus. I don't know what you want from me. I'm not going to be able to give you a good answer. Many people are using these things as inspiration and benefiting from them. Oh. Yeah. On to our next point. Many people, according to me in this point, are using these things as inspiration and benefiting from them. But those people have the sense not to name them after the Torment Nexus version. So in other words, in many of these cases, like obviously a point we're going to get to in a little bit is arrogance, right? A very, very obvious reason that some rich, powerful people make these things is simply that they are arrogant. They read the book, they were inspired by the book. They know the thing in the book is bad, but they believe that they will just be better because of magic, frankly, because they will not and are not better with these things most of the time. They miss the point of the book, maybe you would say. They read the book, they understood, they consumed, they absorbed the idea of the fantasy MacGuffin Torment Nexus in the book, but they didn't understand the point of the book, which is that the absolute power corrupts absolutely, though I don't actually believe that. It's just the closest to what I mean in this point. They think that they're going to do it better than everybody else, and that is why they fail at it. Obviously, that's one of these things. So this point is sort of the flip side, which is that in many of these cases, you could, in theory, use these things in a positive way. It's just not very likely that somebody so heavily motivated by only profit is going to do that. And so there are people using inspiration from negative and positive, artistic work to do positive things, but those people are not shouting about it, and they're not naming it after the pop culture thing, because that's usually the version that you need to revise and make into a real thing to like do something in society. And so that's my theory, basically. If you were to exhaustively look, you would find plenty of examples of art influencing both from negative and positive sources in the art. You'd find plenty of sources of humans being inspired by art to make positive change in their life, and using negative inspiration points, Torment Nexus inspiration points, to make positive changes in their lives. But those people don't call it the Torment Nexus. And because that is a stupid thing to do, we can hopefully agree. And so you wouldn't find those people easily. But now and again, you see something very clever and sort of sci-fi, or like this feels 30 years ahead of where the rest of the world is, that like just some guy is doing. I had a whole, I'll just give you one random example, but there's lots of these. If you look out for them, people are doing really smart, great things in the world. They're just like smart. So they don't name it after, they don't make a meal replacement product and name it Soylent. Like Soylent isn't even a bad product in my opinion, but naming it Soylent is unbelievably stupid. So I don't know what's going, like why? we're going to try. We're trying already. We're not going to be able to unpack that though. There was this coffee shop I went to. So a couple of years ago, I was experimenting with decaf, and I don't experience the stimulating effects of caffeine, but caffeine still has other negative effects. It's not good for you to drink a ton of caffeine, which sucks because if you didn't experience the stimulating effect of caffeine and you didn't experience any other negative effects of caffeine, coffee and like tea don't have any calories, and they do also have other beneficial, bioactive chemicals in them for you. Coffee has a surprising amount of fiber, we often will quote. So it would be great. You could just drink a ton of it and life would be amazing. This was my mind when I thought, well, if decaf coffee could be good, there's lots of decaf coffee processes that exist. If I can just try them and see which one I like, see which one other people like, see how they compare, then I can buy a bunch of decaf, drink infinite coffee, and presumably have very excellent bowel movements or something. I'm not sure what the end game is here. I just want to drink a lot of delicious coffee. I had been on this journey. There was that huge James Hoffman decaf tasting. That's awesome. Topic for another time. Some of you might have already heard. Basically, he found a way to get us the same exact coffee beans, the same lot from the same harvest of beans, processed normally and then also decaffeinated three common ways. But otherwise, like they're the exact same coffee. That's virtually impossible to do normally, especially multiple different decaf processes is very hard, like unheard of. I don't see how you do this otherwise. And then he made it so you could just go buy kits of this. Like normal people could just order up a kit and it would come in the mail in a week for a reasonable price, like $10, you know. That's insane. Like that's awesome. So I tasted this, and the short version is decaf is really good, but it stales much faster. So I'd been really excited, but you know, like unfortunately, the whole reason this was useful is because the world's not really here yet. You know, people, cafes, even good cafes, don't seem to understand that to have good decaf, you're going to need to intervene somehow. Because if you just keep a bag of decaffeinated coffee beans, and then you make coffee out of those whenever someone asks for decaf, and you make coffee out of your normal bag whenever someone asks for a not decaf cup of coffee, surprise, people will have more of the normal one, and the decaf one stales faster. So you'll use it less quickly and it stales faster. Therefore, this means it will nearly always be stale when everyone asks. That will cause it to taste bad. This will create a reputation that decaf coffee tastes bad, even though it tastes good, even better in some taste tests than non-decaffeinated coffee when it's fresh. What do you do about this? You freeze your coffee beans. I was just wondering when I would see the coffee industry decades from now start freezing their coffee beans when I happened into a local coffee shop where I ordered a decaf cup of coffee, and what did he do but pull a test tube of coffee beans out of the freezer that was a single labeled dose of decaf. Okay, so like I don't think that this guy did the tasting thing from the James Hoffman video a month ago and then changed his whole business. I'm thinking he just came up with this independently 5 years ago, and it's been making people delicious decaf for years. Fortunate that I have found this cafe, and thus did I give them much business and have many fiscal children worth of profit with them. That this metaphor got very off. You get it. This was just an example to say that you do find these pockets of people who are just honing these subjects, and there's nothing special about coming up with these ideas. They naturally follow if you're given enough time to chew on the subject. Ways to get the general population to chew on a subject and make progress are not the same as like some guy in his coffee shop that he solo operates coming up with that subject. It's mostly easier, in my opinion, to come up with it in the solo context. Getting the general public to see that this is probably where we're going and we might as well just go there and make things better. Let's do everything differently everywhere is harder. You know, hopefully easy to argue that, than just doing it in your own space. And so those people those people are the forefront of like actual humanity, in my opinion. If you just go out and find somebody running a business on their own, they are doing the most advanced things any human is doing. Usually, it's going to be the person who doesn't work with a team or works with a very small team, or, you know, they're an astrophysicist, but they're like, you know, not on some very readily available, profitable project right now. They're sort of between, or they have some bespoke work situation, but they can still do astrophysics. Like, presumably that person is the best at that subject. I'm open to this not being true for every human pursuit, but for most human pursuits, I think it's pretty clearly those people. And so I guess my point is they're harder to find. And so the people that have advanced these things in good ways or taken inspiration from utopia, well, it's basically impossible to apply unless you either have a ton of money or aren't surrounded by a bunch of other people you also need to influence. Therefore, those are the people you'll find doing this. But it turns out a lot of people who don't spend a bunch of time with themselves aren't as like smart or emotionally intelligent. Therefore, they usually do it worse. And that's why you get the people remaking the Torment Nexus and then naming it. But then also people like adapting these ideas to be something actually good, but then you never find that thing. I think this is a decently robust explanation. See, it's not like good that people are making the Torment Nexus, but there's actually some decent there's not decent reasons to be making the Torment. You get it. But there's some decent reasons why things would be this way. We talked about it before. I don't think we really need to talk about this point much more, but like very simply arrogance was the point I made before. Obviously, one reason that some people make these things is that they read the story about them, they understand or they think they understand the thing in the story, they are inspired by the thing in the story, but they're just very arrogant and immature, and so they don't understand that what they are doing was the point of the story. They are making the same mistake in the story. And to say, oh, I can do it better, is the mistake that the story is about, but they just did not understand that part of the story, so they make the thing, and it like really is just that stupid. They just need to have better reading comprehension and think about things more, sit with things, and not be a megalomaniac. But if you're handed a ton of money out of nowhere before you even start breathing, I suppose that is how you would feel. So go figure. There are rich people that aren't incompetent. I just don't know where they are. Anyway, so obviously for some people it's hubris. Let's also be fair and say, I'm sure there's the odd person who genuinely attempts to avoid the issues, but simply underestimates them. Reads a sci-fi thing with a Torment Nexus, understands the Torment Nexus, does internalize that they can't just be arrogant and think that they'll do it better, and attempts to subvert that only to earnestly fail at subverting that. And they still end up making the Torment Nexus, but they did actually try not to. And they, if it is possible to succeed at not making the Torment Nexus out of the Torment Nexus, they might have been on the path to succeeding, but they simply failed. Like, sure, of course. And more power to you, I guess. That's actually still bad. Anyway, let's just acknowledge that for a sec. Nice try. Please be more careful next time. I don't know, it's still pretty bad. So, yeah. And then finally, I think that there's like a weird final one that is basically, again, these things are often technological advances that kind of make sense. There's a sort of trying to automate something. The example I often like is Psycho-Pass. Psycho-Pass is I think it's a dystopian future anime that is about psychopasses. Basically, the Japanese government develops technology to scan people's moods and behaviors and tendencies and personalities, kind of, and turn them into numbers, into a score, and specifically a crime coefficient, as well as a hue, like what shade of that feeling you have. And this can be used by law enforcement, who can only fire weapons that can hurt and kill people if their crime coefficient is high enough. So only the system making your score high enough allows you to be shot and killed, basically. And you are also immune to enforcement action, even if you do something that would otherwise be considered illegal, if you don't have criminal intent. Or you can spoof the system, which is something that happens in Psycho-Pass, the anime, which I would say is a dystopian story. But the point is made that, like, obviously removing snap human emotional police officer judgment isn't, like, irrelevant. That's not only bad. That is good in some ways, at least. It is good. It's at least somewhat good. There are bad parts, and you might agree by the end of Psycho-Pass that the bad parts might outweigh the good parts, or you might not. But there's no arguing that there aren't bad and good parts. Psychopasses and the Sybil system, as it's called in Psycho-Pass, are a trade-off. You might argue it's not worth it, but it would be impossible to suggest that there are no benefits to that system, I think. That would be being disingenuous. There are some benefits that come at some cost. And I think the thing that's interesting about that is to look at how sometimes the human cost is tied up in societal values. In Psycho-Pass, I'm not completely sure that it is. There's this idea of human panic and urgency getting damaged a bit, and people kind of can't register that a threat is there because things happen in too regular, too frictionless of a way. Though that's a theory and a theme that I wish the series would flesh out more. But anyway, it is there, but they don't flesh that out that much. That people are kind of desensitized to everything. And they flesh that out actually more in Psycho-Pass 2, which it's a topic for another time, but it gets complicated. The sci-fi maybe changed its mind about what it's about. Go figure. The point is that these are cases where the value of that human element is obviously debatable. There are positives and negatives to removing police officer judgment in this way from the police force, right? there are positive and negative things. However, some of our negative reaction to seeing that is because we live in a society that currently privileges that agency. And so we have some bias going in as well. And I think it's pretty straightforward in many of these cases to notice that there are some positive things that aren't your biases, some positive things that are your biases, some negative things, and maybe some negative things that are your biases too. When you look at these things, there's a mix of those four things. The point I'm trying to make is that I think there are some times when a Torment Nexus thing is invented and it seems Torment Nexus-y, but it actually wouldn't be in a sufficiently unbroken society. So like a common point with AI, for example, is that a lot of large language model stuff, or, you know, things like Midjourney and the banana one, the name of which I'm forgetting. Anyway, you know, the AI generation stuff that we have right now, this generation of AI technologies can automate some things that it is good to automate. It just doesn't automate very many things and is largely useless without good questions from a human operator. It's amazing how much more useful, if you want to say it that way, these technologies are if you are already a smart and thoughtful person. They can skip a lot of what would literally just be grunt work, but they usually don't the way that most people use them. Most people create something kind of pointless when they use these tools. They eliminate the process, and then the product was never useful, so eliminating the process eliminates the only value of doing the exercise. Something like cheating on your homework using AI. Maybe you shouldn't need to do that homework, but if it is valuable homework to do, there is no point in doing it by using AI. That's something like that, just as an example. And so basically my point here is I'm not going to say Torment Nexus is good, anything like that, just to make the point that in some cases, these technologies actually might be much more okay if we didn't live in a society that was otherwise very bad, or that they were motivated by profit by so much. And so in a vacuum, that is like the elevator pitch, the pitch deck for some of these ideas might be surprisingly not that bad in the abstract. And it's just that we don't live in the abstract. We live in the concrete. And our concrete is different than the one in the story. So maybe some people understandably felt like this was going to go better than it actually did. I just feel like in many cases, that is giving those people a lot of credit, and it was pretty obvious this would be bad. I feel like if you get to the point where the US Department of War is having a conversation and you're Anthropic and you say that they can use your AI for literally everything except mass surveillance and automated killing, it's kind of like the moment you say that, you should already know that that's bad. Like you can't, like that's not going to work. Like there can't be that big of a flaw. We're out of the realm of the pitch deck now. So I guess that didn't really register to those people. There are a bunch of reasons why maybe this is happening the way it is. Solutions. Slight voice crack. Yay, you know, this is a part of the parlay where I'm just gonna say a bunch of stuff and it'll totally be relevant. And we'll solve world hunger right here. And here we go. Make blunt positive stories. I am going to say that. I think that in many cases, the positive thing in a story is ephemeral, is made ephemeral somehow. Yes, it is easier, as I said in my early point, to describe negative things in a lot of ways. I don't think that that is 100% true, though. There are some positive good things that are just not discussed. There's an entertainment to awe. Something I've been wondering a lot as I've been getting back into writing is how much people won't listen to a story that is just like mostly very positive and isn't about conflict, but is still about tension and expectation and payoff, but just isn't about negative versions of those things. Like you go on an adventure with like basic safety and you experience the wonder of exploring, and there is anticipation and tension of a sort, but not danger, like not a negative experience. How much do people not actually like that? Like how much is it that people do not enjoy that? That's just boring. Versus how much do people just think that sounds boring, but there's just very little of it made? And so how good could you make a story that just is positive? I've often felt like people are a little negative for the negativity's sake. The human condition is already bad enough. I don't really feel like you need anything very negative to happen to a character for them to be full of ennui, completely justified. And I sort of hate it when stories have this thing where the character has a horrifically terrible backstory, basically just to explain why they're really sad. You don't like, it would be reasonable to be this upset even with a perfect childhood, like if that exists, which it doesn't, you know. You don't, to me that's actually, it's sort of shallow when there needs to like be a reason why you're very upset with the world around you. Like that, there isn't. It just is a valid interpretation of the events around us. And it's also valid to consider them a starting point that could potentially get better and be positive about it. But it's not like more sensible because something negative happened to you. That's actually less of a good reason because you're using it as false proof that the world is just bad. That's just immature though. Understandable, not blamefully immature, but that's not like a deeper way of engaging in the world being bad. That's a more shallow way of engaging with the world being bad, in my opinion. Imagine my frustration that every single story ever does it that way. There you go. But basically, I'm just saying I think you could do the way the negative things are depicted as a positive thing. Detail the positive thing and potentially its complications in practice, and make the worlds of art more about the details of these things. I think we're already getting this a little bit because it's becoming slightly more popular in my experience with fantasy to describe out what things do and how things work, and the perception that magic is magic and therefore you can't ever know anything about how it works or that's not magic. That's hand wavy and oversimplified, and thankfully I feel is somewhat dying off now. And this is just one small way in which humanity is inching toward just ask for explanations for everything, which would solve a lot of these problems. Video game build system details, cough. Anyway, explicitly saying what it would take for a bad technology to work well, yeah, this one's kind of already done. So the idea here is that in these works, you could be more clear about why it is not likely that a technology will do well in the real world. I just feel like the kind of person who's reading these and actually becoming inspired is probably going to ignore that part. So I don't really believe in this one that much. Let's just keep going. Right, there was this point I'd written in the show notes that it's not good to overreact, you know? Mostly, why create the Torment Nexus equals people stupid. Therefore, if you just make it less rewarding to be an idiot, this will largely go away on its own. This one is always kind of tricky, right? That's kind of true about most problems. If you just, like, made a system that rewarded stupid people less, that would make most things that are currently bad get better some amount. And so you can ask, like, when is it warranted to have a specific or boutique solution for this societal problem versus you just need to make a system that doesn't reward people like this generally, and then that will get rid of some of them. And that is really the only problem here. That is, it's obvious not to create the Torment Nexus. So does it really make sense to address this in any direct way? Or should we just focus those resources on making it so people dumb enough to recreate the Torment Nexus don't get in as many positions of power? I feel like the second one is a better approach. So yeah, again, I'm not really suggesting like you should write every single story that has any cautionary tale in it to be the most obvious and in-your-face thing ever made just because some people are that stupid. Like, no, I don't think that that is the preferable approach. I was just pointing out that you could do that. I'm not sure it would work well, but that is the thing you could do. More interesting to me is this point about making more positive art. Like, I do think there's something there. I do think that exploring what makes a piece of art tick is a part of art making, which I think it is, that a lot of people either don't even think is part of the activity or sort of don't register as being beneficial. A lot of current game developers, for example, don't really know anything about why games are fun. Some do, and lots don't pursue that idea. They just try to make versions of things they feel like it is already clear why that's fun, and they try to make that better. But they don't go down to the bedrock and say, but what is the essence of this being fun? There's even languages that have terms for this, and to my knowledge, English isn't really one of them. But in Japanese, they call it game-sei, game essence, sort of game spirit stuff, if you want to translate it that way. The core push and pull of the game is a good way to describe that. And making games this way often makes better, more innovative games. There's arguably not much of a point to making games if you don't do that. And so the more people are engaging with, well, what is the core why does this even exist? Like, who cares? We don't need another game. We don't need another book. It's fine if you want to write one, but it's not like making the world any better to just write a book. Write them for fun, for yourself, to grow, to have the experience of being a writer. But when you want it to be entertainment for other people, maybe it is worth having a moment to engage with, well, what is the point of this? Like, why? What does this offer? Do I want this in the way of whatever other thing people are going to find? I think most people find that idea to be at odds with the impulse to create art. They feel like you can kind of only have one. Okay, I'm just saying that if you could have both, that would be really good, because it makes virtually everything better with very little further effort to have the mindset of like, what is the point of this? As long as you also retain the like human hubris that you want to say your thing. Like, yeah, that's valuable too. There's just not really a great reason why it can't be, with a bit of thought made to how this is going to impact people on the ground and what it will actually do to the world. I feel like that's not allergic to art. But that's not most people's opinions. So there you go. This was my short section on solutions to this problem. Did you miss it? You may have blinked. I just thought it would be fun to include. So it was a fun parlay. And Mr. Food, I hope a nice little tit for tat to the first one, which was about like positive impact of art. I'll link those to each other, so there's a link in the description if you're interested. If you liked this, I think that parlay is similar, so maybe you would enjoy that one. Thank you very much for your support, Mr. Food. Looking forward to the next one. Folks, if you enjoyed these, you can get your own using a link in the description. And I know a lot of you pay me through that link to just support the show. So thanks very much. Let's see you in the next one.